Objection! Olivia's voice echoed through the courtroom. Judge Whitman leaned forward, a smirk on his face. Overruled. Sit down, counselor. The jury exchanged uneasy glances. Something wasn't right. Olivia's fists clenched. With all due respect, Your Honor, you just made a mistake. Gasps, murmurs. Then, she placed a confidential document on the table. The judge's face drained of color. His arrogance turned to panic. What did she just reveal? Watch to find out. The tension in the courtroom was suffocating. The polished mahogany benches, the golden streaks of sunlight filtering through the towering stained glass windows, the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the judge's desk. It all should have felt grand, like justice was being served. But today, this was no temple of justice. It was a battlefield, and Olivia Carter had just fired the first shot. Objection! Olivia's voice cut through the heavy silence, sharp and commanding. Judge Whitman barely looked up. A smirk played at the corner of his lips as he leaned forward, his fingers resting lazily on the gavel. His tone was dismissive, dripping with false authority. Overruled. Sit down, counselor. The courtroom fell into a hushed murmur. A few jurors exchanged uneasy glances. Spectators in the gallery leaned forward, sensing something wasn't right. But Olivia didn't sit. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she tightened her grip on the confidential file in her hands, the very document that could bring down one of the most powerful men in the city. With all due respect, Your Honor. Olivia's voice remained steady, but beneath it there was something else, a storm brewing. You just made a mistake. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notepads. Even the bailiff shifted uncomfortably. For the first time, the smirk faded from Judge Whitman's face. Olivia took a step forward, her heels clicking against the marble floor, and placed the document on the table in front of her. Then she slid it forward. Whitman's fingers twitched. He hesitated for just a fraction of a second, but it was enough. Enough for Olivia to see it. Enough for the jury to see it. Fear. Real, undeniable fear. The man who had spent decades bending the law, silencing his enemies, and burying the truth beneath a mountain of corruption was suddenly exposed, vulnerable, and the whole world was watching. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple. His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. Olivia had him. The moment stretched, the silence thick enough to drown in. Then finally, Judge Whitman reached for the document. His hands trembled. The power in the room had shifted. The weight of years of deception, manipulation, and unchecked authority now bore down on him. And Olivia Carter? She was just getting started. The moment Judge Whitman's fingers brushed against the document, the courtroom felt like it had stopped breathing. The silence wasn't just stillness. It was tension, waiting to snap. District Attorney Greg Matthews, seated at the prosecution table, had been watching closely. His smug confidence flickered for a moment, his fingers drumming lightly against the desk. He didn't like surprises. And Olivia Carter, she was full of them. Your Honor, Matthews interjected, standing up, adjusting his perfectly tailored suit as if he could smooth away the situation. Before we entertain this spectacle, I'd like to remind the court that we are here to try a case, not to engage in baseless accusations. Olivia didn't take her eyes off the judge. Is that what you think this is? She asked, her voice deceptively calm. A desperate stunt, Matthews replied smoothly, designed to mislead, confuse, and waste everyone's time. Olivia finally turned to face him. She studied him for a beat before speaking. You didn't even read it. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. A few jurors shifted in their seats, some watching Matthews, others still fixated on Judge Whitman. Matthews scoffed, picking up the document with 2 fingers like it was something disgusting. He barely glanced at the first page before he chuckled, shaking his head. You expect us to believe this nonsense? He said, waving the paper in the air. Your Honor, I move to strike this so-called evidence from the record. There is nothing credible here. Olivia took a slow breath. She had expected this. I'd be careful about calling it nonsense, she said, stepping forward, because those documents, they contain something you weren't prepared for. Matthew's smirk didn't fade, but Olivia saw the way his jaw clenched. He knew she wasn't bluffing. Judge Whitman finally cleared his throat, his voice a fraction less steady than before. Ms. Carter, he said, forcing authority into his tone, this court does not operate on theatrics. If this evidence is legitimate, you will need a credible witness to verify its source. He thought he had her. But Olivia had been waiting for this moment. She exhaled softly before speaking. I was hoping you'd say that, Your Honor. And then, the double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. The entire room turned, heads whipping toward the entrance. Footsteps echoed against the marble floors. A woman walked in. A woman Whitman knew. A woman Matthews feared. Sophia Langley. Her auburn hair was pulled into a tight bun, her navy blue blazer crisp, her every step measured. She had once been the judge's most trusted legal clerk, until she learned the truth, until she found something she was never supposed to see, and now she was here. Judge Whitman's grip on his gavel tightened. Matthew's face drained of color. The moment stretched, tension thickening like a storm about to break. Olivia turned back to the judge. You wanted a witness? She said, her voice quiet but deadly. Here she is. The moment Sophia Langley stepped into the courtroom, the entire trial shifted. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even the jury, who had maintained a neutral demeanor throughout the case, exchanged glances. The reporters in the back scrambled to adjust their cameras, pens furiously scratching on notepads. And at the judge's bench? Judge Whitman's fingers curled around his gavel like a drowning man clutching onto a lifeline. District Attorney Greg Matthews, who had worn a smirk all morning, now looked as if someone had just pulled the ground from beneath him. Sophia Langley, the woman who had once been Whitman's right hand, the woman who knew everything, and she was here, against him. Olivia Carter took a step forward, the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders. This was it, the moment of reckoning. Ms. Langley, she said, keeping her voice steady, please state your name and occupation for the record. Sophia cleared her throat, her voice softer than Olivia had expected, but firm nonetheless. Sophia Langley, former legal clerk for Judge William Whitman. The effect of those words was instantaneous. A low murmur spread through the courtroom. Matthews shot up from his chair, his face taut with barely contained panic. "Objection!" he barked. "This witness was not on the approved list. This is an ambush, Your Honor." Olivia didn't flinch. "Overruled," Judge Whitman said quickly, his voice harsher than usual. But the damage was already done. His own discomfort was bleeding through. Matthews clenched his jaw. He had been hoping to avoid this moment, because if Sophia Langley spoke, the trial was over. Olivia turned back to her witness. "Ms. Langley," she said, pacing slightly, making sure every juror was hanging onto her words, "can you tell the court what you discovered while working for Judge Whitman?" Sophia hesitated, just for a second. The weight of the moment, the fear of retaliation, it was all there in the slight tremor of her hands. But then she straightened her back, and she spoke. "I discovered," she said, her voice clear and unwavering, "that Judge Whitman has been accepting bribes for over 15 years. He manipulated case outcomes, protected wealthy criminals, and sentenced innocent people to prison, all in exchange for money and political favors." The room exploded. Gasps. Shock. A few audible curses. The reporters in the back looked like Christmas had come early, scrambling to document every word. Judge Whitman slammed his gavel. "Order, order!" But there was no order left, because the people had just heard the truth. Olivia let the noise settle just enough before she spoke again. "Miss Langley, do you have proof?" Sophia nodded. "Yes." And then she reached into her bag and pulled out a flash drive. Judge Whitman turned pale. Matthews stumbled back into his chair. Olivia took a slow breath. "What is on that drive?" Sophia looked at the judge, right into his panicked, furious eyes. Every transaction, every email, every cover-up. Silence. Dead, suffocating silence. And then, chaos. Matthews surged to his feet. "This is outrageous," he roared. "This so-called evidence is illegally obtained." Olivia arched an eyebrow. "Is it?" she asked coolly. "Because last I checked, whistleblowers are protected under federal law. And unless you're suggesting that Judge Whitman wants to argue against the very laws he claims to uphold—" Matthews clenched his fists. Judge Whitman was breathing heavily now, his hands gripping the desk like it was the only thing keeping him standing. And then he did the unthinkable. He grabbed his gavel and threw it across the room. It crashed against the floor with a loud bang. The jury flinched. A security guard instinctively took a step forward, and just like that, the mask slipped. The honorable, untouchable Judge Whitman had just lost control. Olivia took a step forward, her voice calm but firm. "Your Honor," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I believe the court just witnessed your true character." Whitman's nostrils flared. His face was a deep, furious red. "You think you're clever, Ms. Carter?" he snarled. Olivia tilted her head. "No," she said, "I think I'm right." And for the first time, he had nothing to say. The courtroom was silent, yet the weight of the moment pressed down on everyone in the room. Judge Whitman's carefully built facade of power had just crumbled before the eyes of the world. District Attorney Matthews, who had once smirked with arrogance, now sat motionless, his face drained of color. The jury exchanged glances. The truth had hit like a tidal wave, unstoppable and undeniable. Olivia Carter stood tall, unwavering, her breath steady despite the storm she had just endured. And then the gavel fell. After reviewing the evidence and hearing the testimony presented in this court, I find Judge William Whitman guilty of obstruction of justice, bribery, and abuse of power. Effective immediately, he will be removed from his position and face criminal charges. The courtroom erupted. Gasps filled the air, followed by a thunderous applause from the spectators who had watched injustice rule for too long. Some even stood, clapping for the woman who had dared to take on the system and win. For the first time, Whitman looked truly afraid. He gripped the edge of his desk as if reality was slipping from his grasp. He had never imagined this day would come, but Olivia Carter had made sure it did. As officers stepped forward to escort him out, Whitman turned, his cold blue eyes locking onto Olivia's. "This isn't over," he muttered, his voice barely audible. Olivia, calm and composed, tilted her head slightly. "No," she said, "it's just beginning." The aftermath, the world watched within hours. The case exploded across national news. Corrupt judge exposed in shocking courtroom twist. Black female attorney destroys systemic injustice. The moment that changed everything. The internet lit up with praise. Social media flooded with clips of the trial, hashtags trending worldwide. Olivia's name became synonymous with courage, justice, and an unstoppable will. But for her, this wasn't about headlines. It was about every person who had been silenced, every innocent life stolen by a system built to work against them. Every moment where power had crushed the powerless. She had fought, and she had won. Days later, as Olivia walked through the city, a voice stopped her. "Excuse me, Miss Carter." She turned to see a young black girl, no older than 15, standing with a notebook in her hands. Her eyes shined with admiration, filled with a hope that Olivia recognized all too well. "You're the reason I want to become a lawyer," the girl said, her voice barely above a whisper. Olivia felt her chest tighten. This was it. This was why she fought. Kneeling slightly, she looked the girl in the eyes and smiled. "Then promise me something," Olivia said softly. "Never let anyone tell you that you don't belong." The girl nodded, her hands trembling with excitement. As Olivia walked away, the weight of the battle she had fought lifted just a little, because change had already begun. This wasn't just Olivia's fight. This is our fight. How many more times does this have to happen? How many more talented professionals will be stopped, doubted, challenged, simply for existing? How many more people will have to pull out a badge just to be believed? If Olivia's story teaches us anything, it's this: silence is complicity. If we don't speak up, they win. Privilege won't protect you forever. Even the most successful Black professionals aren't immune. Justice isn't given. It's fought for. This isn't just a one-time event. It's reality. And until the system changes, until accountability is more than just a press release, it will keep happening. So if you're watching this right now, ask yourself, what will you do? Because if we don't fight for justice today, who will be next? Subscribe for more real stories that need to be told. Like, share, and comment, because your voice matters. If you believe in standing up against injustice, don't just watch. Speak up. Take action. Because when you try to silence the right person, they rise louder than ever.